The Anglo Boer War, as witnessed by Deneys Reitz, and written in his book Commando, a Boer War journal of the Boer War, by Deneys Reitz. Chapter 14. New Conditions. Our road ran through the Sabi, low country, teeming with big game of all descriptions. By day, great herds of zebra, wildebeest, and sable stood fearlessly gazing at us. And at night, lions prowled, roaring around our camps. Of hunting, we had our full, and to me this was a journey through a strange and remote region. It was full of fascination, for we were passing through country as untouched as that upon which the old pioneers had looked, when first they came north in the days of the Great Trek. After long marches, we reached the foot of the mighty range that runs north as far as the eye can see. From here, General Botha sent the commandos on, with instructions to follow the base of the escarpment to the Murchison range, 200 miles away. He himself, escorted by the remnant of the Johannesburg police, and accompanied by a handful of officials who still remained, climbed up by a hunting path to make for a lost village called Oorigstad in the Steelpoort Gorge, our way leading by Graskop and Pilgrim's Rest, amid mountains and forests and gorges more beautiful than any I know of in South Africa. Now that President Kruger had left the country, the Transvaal government consisted of my father and Skalkberger, who was the vice president, together with a few other heads of departments, and they naturally followed General Botha up the mountain, as did my brothers and I. We remained at Oorigstad for a week, but when malaria broke out, the government moved to within a few miles of Lydenburg, a village on higher ground. General Botha now went off to plan guerrilla operations. He did this so effectively that in a few months' time, he had mobile forces in every quarter of the Transvaal, harrying and worrying the British far and near. A reawakening that must have been particularly galling to them, considering how close we had been to a general collapse. All this, however, was still to come. And in the meanwhile, my brothers and I lay in the government laager, fretting at our enforced idleness. We endured it for 2 weeks, after which we made up our minds to leave. My youngest brother was still so weak from his illness that he had to remain, but the other 3 of us made ready. My brother Hjalmar, who had a queer bent of his own, preferred to go off by himself. And although we tried to keep him with us, he rode away towards the eastern Transvaal. He was subsequently captured and sent to a prison in India, and I did not see him again. My brother Hubert and I decided to go west. We had heard from a passing burger that General Beyers was collecting a force at the Warmbaths, 200 miles distant. So we agreed to ride thither. Our preparations were soon made, for they were simple enough. We shot a kudu in the mountain and made biltong, and we collected a supply of mealies from a neighboring field. This was all the commissariat that we had, for now we were cut off from the outer world through losing the Dalgoa Bay line. We were on Spartan diet. And for the next 2 years, such luxuries as sugar, coffee, tea, bread, soap were only to be had on rare occasions by capture from the enemy. We said goodbye to all and set out. We did not see my father again for 20 months. He remained in the field until the end of the war with a government laager, handling his rifle like a private soldier when they came under fire, which was quite often, and doing much to keep up the spirits of the fighting men by his poems and his personal example. It was a long ride to the warm baths. Our way went through bush country, with neither track nor road to guide us, for the region we traversed was untenanted, save by native tribes and wild animals. I was on my splendid old roan, who had carried me from the start, and my brother rode the horse which we had taken back from our native boy at Pretoria. On the third day of our journey, we had a mournful encounter. We came on Commandant Gravett, dying of wounds in the bush. He had been hit by a shell 10 days before, and his men had brought him here to prevent his falling into the hands of the British. We knew his end was approaching, but he bore us his sufferings without complaint, and spoke of his coming death with resignation. He called us to him a few minutes before the end to tell us of his friendship with my father in the former days, and a little while after he lapsed into unconsciousness, from which he never recovered. We helped to bury him under a tree and rode saddened on our way. For 10 days we journeyed, straying far north beyond the Olifants River, misled by natives who told us of a commando in that direction. When we came up with this force, it was only a patrol on their way to Sekununi's country to inquire into fighting that had broken out between two native tribes. Among the patrol were old General Marula and his brother Swart Lavai, now serving in the ranks. They were dressed as in the Natal days, only shabbier, from long exposure in the veld. But they greeted us as if nothing had changed since. At length we turned south and eventually reached Warm Baths, where we found General Boer with 1,000 men. He had been a lawyer before the war and was now in command of the Northwest under General Botha's new scheme of reorganization. He was a brave man, but I never liked him. Here we were surprised to find our old ACC Commando almost intact. After that unfortunate day when Commandant Milan and 7 men were killed, they had left the highveld and had made straight for these parts. This was why we had never come across them during the retreat to the Portuguese border. They were still about 60 strong, under command of a newcomer, a young officer named Lordy Krause, who invited us to rejoin, which we did at once. We remained in the neighborhood of the Warm Baths for the better part of a month, while General Boer was raising more men, and the time passed pleasantly enough. We hunted a good deal, and several times rode out on patrol to Pinard River, 25 miles towards Pretoria, to watch the doings of a large English camp there. On one of these occasions, we had a narrow escape. 6 of us were approaching a koppie, overlooking the camp, when suddenly a strong body of horsemen tried to cut off our retreat. We turned and made a dash for it, passing so near to some of the troopers that I heard them shouting at us to halt, while their bullets whipped around us as they galloped through the bush. We shook them off, however, without getting a scratch. Except for these patrols and hunting for the pot, we spent a quiet time. Late in November, my younger brother Arend arrived at the baths, looking fit and well, having ridden hundreds of miles to find us, for he too had found life in the government laager too slow once he was restored to health. We were very glad to see him, and the three of us built a weatherproof hut and fared well as food was plentiful. Rations were chiefly game and mealie meal, of which last General Boer had accumulated a large supply from the Waterberg farms. He himself was camped close to us, a dark, moody man who lost no opportunity of holding prayer meetings. With him was the Reverend Mr. Kriel, a Dutch Reformed parson, equally zealous. So between the two, we were continually bidden to religious services, and they even went the length of ordering all the younger men to attend Bible classes. When my brothers and I ignored the order, General Boer and Mr. Kriel rode over in person to expostulate with us and even threaten us to turn us out of the Commando. But we stuck to our guns and heard nothing further of it. In fact, we rather gained in reputation, for the Boers, although a religious people, are not intolerant of matters of faith. I did not care for Boers, for I liked the old predikant for all his narrowness, and afterwards in the Cape Colony, I grew to admire him as a steadfast man. On about the 7th of December 1900, we were told to be in readiness to move south next day. My brother Hubert now surprised us by saying he was not coming. He said that he was going to be a gunner with a creosote gun, one of the few still left, and was leaving at once with his new unit. He had always wished to be an artilleryman, and his obstinacy defeated our arguments. He rode away that same afternoon, and I have not seen him since. For he was captured and sent to Bermuda, where he still is. General Beyers left a few hundred men and his guns behind to oppose the English columns that were preparing to invade the northern Transvaal. And with the rest, about 800 strong, he marched off. His purpose was to make south over the Magaliesbergen to the highveld beyond, in order to carry on guerrilla warfare there. Our first day's track brought us to the big native stud of a local chief named Koos Mamugali. From here, we looked across a valley 12 miles wide towards the Magaliesbergen. The mountain range stretches east to west for 100 miles and more, and in this area forms the dividing line between the highveld and the bush country from which we were emerging. We crossed the valley that night, and by daybreak reached the foot of a disused pass known as the Old Wagon Road. Yeah, there was evidence that General de la Rey had lately been in the vicinity, for we found a burning convoy of 50 or 60 English supply wagons, and one of his men who came riding by told us that they had ambushed the wagons in a stiff fight and had taken many prisoners. We looked on this as a good omen after the unbroken run of ill luck that had dogged us for so long, for it showed that General Botha's reorganization was beginning to take effect. After a rest, we climbed the pass, reaching the top by 4 that afternoon. From there southwards, we had a wide view over the grass-covered plains, and far away on the skyline we could even see the smokestacks and gold mines of the Witwatersrand. The sight raised our spirits, and the men crowded the edge of the cliff, animatedly discussing the improved outlook. For we were back from the wilds to within a hail of Pretoria and Johannesburg. Then we came down the south side, and by dark we were off-saddled among the gardens and orchards below. We had had no sleep the night before, and were looking forward to a good night's rest. But this was not to be. As we were preparing our supper, General de la Rey came riding amongst us on his famous little white-faced pony, and word went round that we were to attack an English force camped at the foot of the mountain not far away.